It's certainly a pleasure to be here today and to provide you, hopefully, with some of our experiences, things we learned. It wasn't all success, believe me. There was a lot of failure, too, as we went along, and a lot of things we had to learn the hard way. But I guess we didn't give up. We just kept going, and we had tons of support. And I got to thank Glenn, too. He called me a pioneer. He, as well, is a pioneer in this whole thing. It goes way back, working with people like that, with the manufacturers, with all the industry stakeholders, to ultimately come up with a system. It was simple. Our approach was very simple, but we did forge ahead. So I hopefully will be able to share a bit with you today about some of the things that worked, that didn't work, and again, some of the things to focus on in the future as we move forward. I just wanted to share with you how far this goes back. Neil Hammerschmidt's been involved with this forever as well, and we go back a long ways. And one of the things that always is dear to my heart is we had an American delegation up in Canada just when we were going live with our system, when 911 hit, the very tragic event in the U.S., and we had a bunch of different sectors represented, manufacturers, industry people, government people represented in this U.S. delegation, and they were there that morning to go live through our system, from the visiting tag distributors right through our system as it rolled out. And that morning 911 hit. So our hearts were with you for sure that day, and it was tough for this American delegation in Canada. We finally had to have a guy drive some of the people that came up across the border to Great Falls to get back home. So it was quite an event, and something I will never forget as we worked together. I just wanted to talk about that because it does go back a long ways, a long time ago that we've been doing this, and events happen that we have no control of. So I think preparation is key, to be prepared for things that no one foresees in the future. In this presentation, I just like to touch on some of the items. It's very general, this presentation. It's more just the history and not technical. If anybody has questions, certainly I'll try and answer any of those, but not technical at all. I think you're more up to date on that than I probably am now. I've been somewhat out of it for the last few years, not near as involved as I was initially. In terms of, I'd like to touch on just why we started the program, why ID, why it became so important in Canada, a bit of a historical perspective of the steps we went through to get things set up, mandate and structure, key components of the program. It was very key for us to identify that clearly, and that's something I can't emphasize enough as you move forward through this, to be very clear on what you need to get done and who needs to do it. The BSE investigation, how we actually used the system then already, when the BSE investigation with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and our American counterparts, how we used the system. And then our mandate 10 years later, after we started. We certainly evolved, added on to our mandate what worked, what we learned, and some of our future considerations. In terms of the rationale, this was way back in 1997 that our industry started talking about this in terms of we need to do something as an industry. Our level of identification in the cattle herd had gone down. We used to have a Health of Animals program with a little metal Health of Animals tag in Canada from 1920 to 1985. And that program ceased, so the level of ID, and there was just those little metal tags, but that program had ceased, and the level of ID, we figured, had gone down to about 50% within the Canadian herd by then. So there was a real need to re-identify, along with all the things that were happening around the world, with foot and mouth, BSE, there was all kinds of things, TB cases, things happening that was scaring the industry, basically. And industry people came forward and brought this out as a concern. So we needed to create a program to maintain consumer confidence for food safety and animal health. Certainly, consumer confidence is key as the whole world evolves globally. We need to have faith in what we're producing. Ensure market access. Exports certainly as a percentage of what we produce is way higher in Canada than you have to deal with in the U.S. You don't have near the importance of creating a program for export as we do, but in terms of numbers, you certainly export more than we do. So it's all relative, and I think export is important for every country now. Remain competitive, not only with other species, certainly all types of species, chicken, pork, they're all creating traceability or traceback programs or specific programs to produce certain products. Other countries around the world, Japan, Europe, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, they're all moving forward with traceability and ID programs. So there's certainly, we had reason to do this, and industry certainly started to talk about it a lot with support from the federal government, from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Just a bit of a historical perspective of how we evolved our agency. We had the Canadian Cattlemen's Association as an animal health committee, and it was actually one producer, primarily from Saskatchewan. He was chairman of the Animal Health Committee at the time. He came forward and presented, we need to do something now as an industry at one of their committee meetings, their Animal Health Committee meetings. And from there, a lot of discussion started, and he saw the need as well as a number of other producers. But certainly he was chairman, and he brought it forward as an initiative that we needed to pursue immediately. And then the Canadian Cattlemen's Association supported this, and then we made the effort to get every province, every Cattlemen's Association in every province on board. We did get that support, and then there was a national ID and information workshop set up. It involved people from stakeholders from every group across Canada, different species. Anybody interested came to this national ID workshop, and there was consensus that came out of that we needed to move forward. The concept then was endorsed at the CCIA, Canadian Cattlemen's Association annual meeting in March of '97. Then a few of us developed the business plan to move forward. They made the motion for a business plan to be developed, and that was developed, and it was a business plan that was had a lot of producer input. It was guided by CFIA and the need for animal health and the requirements, but very basic, very simple approach, and something that would work when it actually was rolled out. The CFIA supported all of this. There's the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They supported this. We worked very closely with them in terms of getting consensus and getting support to roll out this program. And finally, in 1998, we incorporated our agency as an industry-led, not-for-profit agency. We only had 2 people initially running the agency, so it was very small. We were dealing with all of Canada, other species, working with government, so and trying to get the word out across Canada exactly what we were doing at that time. Initial system release, we started immediately working with the development of an information system and database that could handle basic information. And the initial release of that system was January 2000, and the official full system implementation wasn't until July 2002, where we had right from when cattle were tagged leaving the herd of origin till the animals were retired at the packing plant. This was our initial strategy, the Canadian beef strategy that we put into the business plan and that was supported by industry, to develop and implement a credible and reliable individual identification traceback system for animal health and food safety in Canada. So at that time, that's all we focused on. We didn't focus on value chain or any additional components. This was strictly our mandate and what we had to get accomplished. The phased in is key, I think, to the implementation of ID. Without being phased in, it would have never worked. If we would have just said, on day 1, all cattle have to be tagged leaving the herd of origin, no exceptions, they have to be read at the packing plant, our program would have been dead in the water very quickly. So we had a phased in approach. It has to work. We're always under that adage that don't force anything on the industry, on producers. or any other sector along the way unless it works in a practical sense. And that was always our approach. I mean, it wasn't easy even selling the whole concept to producers across Canada, but it definitely had to work, and with time, certainly we got a lot of buy-in. So January 1st, 2001, cattle had to be tagged by the time they left their herd of origin. And Canadian Food Inspection Agency was responsible for developing the initial regulations. We already had, we were able to facilitate that with what was there already, but they were responsible for developing them and the enforcement of the program. If it was mandatory, that we needed some level of enforcement to make sure the program was credible and we had as close to 100% cattle tagged as possible. But we did not start out with fines or anything like that. We started out with strictly information and then warnings. And then ultimately we went into the fines when it was accepted and working very well. July 1st, 2001, all cattle in the system had to be identified. So not just leaving the herd of origin at the auction mart, at the feedlot, right through to the packer. And packing plants began to read these cattle as they went through and retire numbers back to our database. Again, enforcement of the program was just via extension and notification. So by no means did we have 100% cattle in this 100% accuracy in the system at this time yet. July 1st, 2002, by then we had full implementation and there were monetary penalties. But again, there was very few fines issued because we did have compliance and we worked very closely with CFIA in implementing the enforcement program. I just had to throw this up because I knew Neil and Glenn would remember these cartoons. This is what it was like in the beginning, because in Canada, the gun registry was coming out. At the same time, our program was being rolled out. So it was very much taken as in the same vein. And this one says, "Don't worry, Audrey, I ain't registering my guns and I ain't registering you." And that was very typical. We had meetings where thousands of people would arrive trying to stop this program initially, way back when the first concept came out, just because of misinformation. It wasn't accurate. They said it was a government program, that we were going to mandate all these things we weren't going to do, things like that. So again, with good information and doing producer meetings, things like that, we did get buy-in. The next cartoon is a year later. Within a year, we were able to get the concept approved. Not necessarily everyone fully supported the program, but the majority, and we had ear tags now being applauded. So we did get support, even though the system was not perfect. Glenn already alluded to this, the structure of CCIA. This was the initial structure. As you probably saw in Anne's presentation, there's certainly more added to it now. We had commercial, purebred, feedlot, auction mart, packing plans, veterinarians, dairy, and Quebec. And then ultimately we have other species, bison, sheep, other species added to it, other sectors. So there's certainly more on the board now. Ex officio. Government, CFIA, it was always been on our board, but not with a vote. They're on the board ex officio. So they contribute, we work closely with them, but and certainly have a good relationship with them, but again, ex officio. And this is no longer, but we had United States as well come to all of our meetings. We had representatives from different groups, NCBA, we had producers, we had organizations, different people represented at all of our initial meetings so that we could share information and harmonize as much as we could with development of the program. Then to deal with issues, which was very key to the success of the program, technical committee, communications, import-export, auction mart, all the areas where there was potentially big issues with the program in terms of not disrupting commerce, making this work for producers. We had expert committees developed to work with specific issues. These are the key components that I was talking about in the program. And this is the role basically of our agency. It was our job to make sure that we could, these key components of the program, that we had industry leading them, industry making the primary decisions, rolling it out in a way that worked. Information system, legislation, regulations, very much we were involved in all the development of that. National standards, technology, and communications. Those were the key components of what we did at the Canadian Cattle ID Agency. This is just a photo of the database initially that we had. I mean, certainly now I'm sure all of these things could be done, you know, a lot better with distributed database and blockchain and all the new technologies. But we certainly had a database with very high level of security. That was key to our producers, that government could only access this in the event of an animal health emergency or an animal health traceback system. All the other information in there was private to producers, and that was very key. We had to really focus on security of the system, confidentiality, and making sure everyone understood that. It was industry built and operated, the whole database. We did the architecture for the whole system, how it has to work. So it was a very practical system. We received international recognition for it because it did work when we needed it. And the technical infrastructure was developed to add on. So later on, when we needed to add on things post-BSE or work with other groups, we could talk to this system through web-enabled services, things like that, add on through portals. We could make the system work and not have to scrap it and start over. How does the system work? Again, very simply, this is how we started out. I don't know if does this work? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. See, technology, I'm a bit out of date. This is how, basically, simply how the system works. Through the Canadian Cattle Identification Agency in Calgary, we issue or allocate numbers to tag manufacturers directly, and these tag manufacturers participating all had to be approved and go through processes to be approved. Then tags are produced and distributed to tag distributors, and then numbers are issued either directly from the manufacturer to the producer or from the tag distributor to the producer. So the numbers that are issued to the producers are recorded within the database. And in our program, we charged 20 cents per tag, ultimately, was our administration fee. And that's basically how we ran our agency, with administration fee on the tags, 20 cents per tag, and it's now higher than that. But it was in the beginning 20 cents per tag. But for the 11 years I was there, it stayed at 20 cents. And now, and also for services provided to other organizations. If we have other species, other groups on our database, we charged for those services. So that as well created income for CCIA. And then through the producers, tags are issued, and they have to put the tags on prior to leaving the herd of origin. And then ultimately, those animals go through the whole system, through the auction mart, order buyer, wherever they go, feedlot, through to the packing plant. And the only other requirement that was under regulation was that all these animals had to be read when they arrive at the packing plant, and and tracked up to the point of carcass inspection, and then those numbers are retired back to the CCIA database. So that's as simple as the approach was to make this work. And again, certainly a very basic, simple system, but it was trusted. It was had very high level of confidentiality and security, and it really worked very well. This is in terms of touching on legislation, regulations. In Canada already, we had this in the Canadian Federal Health of Animals Act before we started with this program. It was already in there for a national identification system for animals for the purpose of determining the presence of and controlling or eradicating animal disease. Because we did initially already have a program in Canada up to 1980. So we had this basis already in place within our regulations and legislation. From that, we worked very closely with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. We developed a document that was in terms of our national ID regulations and a national strategy for what was required. What are the basic things required in national ID regulations to make this work for producers, practical enough, but yet have credibility and integrity on a global basis and in the need of an animal health traceback. So that worked very well. And then the compliance and enforcement strategy, we as well developed with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And that, again, was directly, they did not develop that on their own by no means, but they were responsible for it. So it was their responsibility. Prior to July 1st, as I already mentioned, we just had education, information. We provided tons of that to producers, just what was ultimately coming, that they had a grace period, and buy-in, why we were doing this. And after July 1st, 2002, we started to issue fines. But again, as I said, there weren't many fines issued at all, and it's still not an issue. In terms of national standards, the other key component of the program, I would really emphasize the need for standards in the rollout. Initially, we didn't have standards for all these components, and it did come back to bite us in terms of integrity of the program, standardization of any of these components, premise ID, individual animal ID. The ISO standards were critical to us, the ICAR standards. Premise ID, we developed standards, or we followed international standards on all of these different things. We developed standards for tag distribution, data reporting. National audits certainly became very key to maintaining international recognition of our program. We have CFIA every year audited our program to make sure it met their requirements and did what it was said it would do when we rolled out the program. We had other countries come and audit our program. Japan, other countries would come over and do audits on our system. Animal movement, zoning. We ultimately developed a zoning application to the program as well, and age verification. And age verification was post-BSE. Technology, I'm not sure what you remember of our program, but we did start with barcoded tags. We didn't feel electronic ID. We would get support day one, and it wasn't as advanced as it became later. But what producers would accept, they were already tagging their animals, lots of people, so they wanted a tag that they could, the same type of tag they could still use as management, but could be read on our program. As we know, the barcodes did not work that well. They met our initial requirements. It worked in the beginning, but we certainly saw very quickly we needed to do better and have higher accuracy with read rates and problems with the tag. We also approved numerous tags initially, 20 or 30 or whatever, and that became a problem too with all the different types and different sizes, all the different colors. That became a problem too. The program had to be recognized by a certain tag. So ultimately, we did move on to an electronic ID and also did trials on every aspect of the program in terms of retention, readability trials, traceability trials with any type of technology we were looking at. All tag manufacturers were responsible to go through lab trials and field trials with their new tags that were being proposed. In the lab, we tested for visual, electrical, all types of different mechanical, all types of different attributes that we tested for directly. We worked with a third party to do that, to test the tags, to get them approved, so that we could actually rely on technology, because technology is key. If that doesn't work, the whole program doesn't work. You can see in the packing plants, whoops. Where am I going here? Oh. In the packing plant, we did numerous trials. We were online in packing plants for months with testing different technology as proposed to us through technology companies, because it was a big sell to the packers. We did not want to slow their lines down. They were very supportive. We worked very closely with them, but it was interesting going through these trials. We had all kinds of companies propose different technologies at work. So ultimately, we did find technologies and readers in the packing plant. Readers were just as key as the actual tags. And then you can see feedlot trials and auction mart trials. We also did numerous auction mart trials trying to demonstrate there's potentially additional value to the tag going through the system in terms of promoting animals as they went through sale barns. Ultimately, we did all kinds of different trials, and that's still ongoing. Trials is key to keeping up with technology and moving forward. Communications. Communications, again, very key. stated enough how important communications is with this program. We had a national strategy. And what really worked is the train the trainer thing. We found when we were going to all these meetings across Canada, for example, the auction mart guys some of them didn't really know what we were all about and trust us potentially, and what are we trying to impose this upon. But when we had an auction mart group talking to auction marts, it really worked well. Or feedlot people talking to feedlots, or any stakeholders talking to their own groups. So we would train the trainers to go out and do these meetings, hundreds of meetings across Canada, as the program evolved. So communications was very key, and we had a strategy that we would follow with producing newsletters and producing information meetings across Canada continuously. So again, I can't underestimate that. The information needs to be out there. I'll try and speed up again. It did speed up a bit. It did work. So I just wanted to quickly show you this. Through the BSE investigation, we provided tag inventory, and that was just 2003, shortly after the whole program just came fully implemented. Tag inventory of all quarantined herds involved in the trace out, tag history of animals, retirement data through the plants, information on U.S. plants. We worked with the U.S. plants to get retired Canadian numbers back to use in the investigation. But one thing that really worked well, on scanners that we provided through CCIA, we loaded tag inventories of any potential animals that were involved within an index, where it came from the index herd, and then they went to a feedlot. So we had all their inventory in a scanner, could pick out that animal specifically, and that worked very well. And the International Review Committee was very complimentary of the BSE investigation, but we certainly worked with them then to talk about how we could do better. And these were just quickly, I'll mention them, some of the enhancements we did post-BSE. Age verification, very critical to the system. Again, we could just add that, and it worked well. Premise ID, we already had that, but a much larger focus. Premise ID was in terms of land location, GIS, GPS information, and that became critical if you want to track animal movement. You didn't need it for just the bookend type system, if you want to call it that. But in terms of just animal ID, you don't really need premise ID. We had contact information. But we need it. You'd absolutely need premise ID if you start tracking movement through the system. RFID, group lot, and all these things we already had in the system, but in terms of making them more 100% accurate and following them through. Value-added zoning, where we could zone off for animal health reasons certain areas. By premise numbers, we added that to the system, and a complete disaster recovery system in case something happened to the system. Transition to RFID, again, it didn't happen overnight, and again, I'm emphasizing the need for transition, that phased-in approach to everything. Certainly, as of September 1st, 2006, all cattle leaving the herd of origin had to have a CCIA-approved RFID tag. Till then, we were kind of transitioning from the barcode to the EID. So, again, it worked. The transition worked. That was not easy either. It would have been much better if we started with EID at the beginning. But it was a big struggle, but it did work with the transition again to make it work for industry. 10 years later, our mandate certainly evolved. We went from simple animal health, food safety, traceback system that we now had the 3 pillars of traceability built into our system: animal ID, premise ID, and movement. Increased our level of being able to respond to an animal health emergency with the post-BSE enhancements. Make sure that the system was efficient, accountable, and confidential. That was key, and always being reviewed to make sure that was part of the system. And again, focused now more on multi-species, value-added, things we can do to add value to the industry with branded programs or any type of things you want to trace back on farm programs, verified programs, sustainability programs, whatever the industry needs to do, they now had the capability of doing. Tracking carcass information and working with other groups that were already doing it, not necessarily doing this, but facilitating it happening and having a basic infrastructure in place. What worked? Certainly demonstrate the benefits to the industry, why you're doing this, and what's in it for them. Industry initiated and industry led, that was absolutely key. Even though we worked very closely with government, it was viewed as industry program. Industry sustainable, I explained how we funded the program. We only used government funding initially for development. For example, post-BSE, the initial implementation of our database, but not ongoing. We have to be sustainable. You never know when government funding runs out, that type of thing. So we were industry sustainable, clearly identified our roles between government and industry, cost-effective, user-friendly, proven system with international and national standards. And that, again, I would focus on working globally to be able to share, because animals move, people move, we need to be able to work in harmonization with standardization. All sectors participation. Again, with our program, it was very timely. It certainly sent us over the top after BSE. We went up to a 97 to 99% compliance rate, whereas before it might have been low 90s, high 80s type of thing, or it depends on the area, but higher than that potentially. But it certainly sent us to the top when there actually was an animal health emergency. And again, very flexible system, being able to meet demands, and again, committed to not disrupt commerce. We worked very closely with auction marts. Animal movement is just coming now under the regs in terms of into the system, because we didn't have it. You can't impose something on producers in the industry that it's not ready for, or that doesn't work, or disrupts commerce. So now we're getting to that point, and it's now being implemented within the regs. It's truly created to protect and create value for the livestock industry. What we learn? Certainly expand. We did that. We had industry consultation, but I'd say talk to everybody, all stakeholders, all groups, anybody interested. Certainly get everybody on side and explain the basics of why you're doing this, and clearly identify roles and responsibilities. That's very key, that all of a sudden government doesn't decide, because they paid for something, they're now in control of something, or whatever the case may be. Or same with industry. There's a lot of different groups that want to have roles in this and responsibilities and control it. So you got to be very clear with who does what, and ongoing in terms of agreements and basically everybody agreeing what their specific roles and responsibilities are. And certainly now, as I said, I would focus on electronic ID. And again, that technology is expanding, and there's new technology there as well. So certainly things are evolving. Integrity, credibility, standards, audit, that's all very key in terms of global recognition, standardization. Facilitate value chain. If you have the basic infrastructure, the system should be able to add on whatever industry wants down the road, or whatever they see the need for. And a lot of that absolutely is voluntary. Ensure market neutral, and definitely walk before you run. And bottom line is, you'll never keep everyone happy. As I said, everybody certainly wasn't on side, still is not with this program, but at some point you just got to do it. And I think that's basically what we did. We just did it regardless of, and started out small and simple. Just end it with some future considerations. I would say domestic and international requirements for traceability, that everybody work together on these. That's a key to my thinking anyway, as we develop the program, that isn't just Canada, that we look around the world, what's being developed. A lot of technologies already being tested and worked on, and there's a lot of things we can learn. A lot of standards are developed. Improve our emergency response continuously. Technology, I mentioned that. Enhanced interface with other groups. Certainly bring in anyone that's interested, work with them, and encourage that. Initially, we were pretty small, but we did expand, and that certainly made our program better, is by involving as many groups as possible. And again, long-term sustainability, make sure that industry can fund this. If government backs out or something happens, that you have an infrastructure in place where you can keep this program going, and the control of the program. Government's very key to its success, I think, in terms of animal health and food safety, and in terms of recognition. But again, have those roles very clear, and harmonization. And that's it, and I certainly would love to answer some questions if you have them. And if you climb in the saddle, be ready for the ride. That's all I can say.